As you've heard repeatedly today and prior weeks, and you see on the screen, our theme this semester is Love in the Gray. And when we say love in the gray, we define the gray as those complex experiences where you experience viruses like COVID-19, war, and even death. And those experiences causes us to go through a well of emotions, trauma, pain, and hurt. And then when we find ourselves in the gray, we often wrestle with the picture of God. We wrestle with God. And we call that Theodicy, trying to vindicate the goodness of God in the face of evil. I don't know about you, but I know about me, I've been through many gray experiences where I question and I'm like, God, if you exist, why? Why do you allow this? Why do you allow so much calamity and hurt and pain, especially for believers? And so, because I know I've been through it and I've counseled many people who have been through wrestling with that question, today we decided, as we did last week, we started off last week this conversation about how to experience love and how to love God in the midst of the gray. And so today we felt it important to continue this conversation because we know many of you wrestle with this topic. And today we've invited the great Professor Susan Zork to help us navigate this question. Welcome her to the stage. We want you to be a part of this conversation. So on the screen, you will see a number, a Google number that you can text in your questions as we are talking. A question may come to your mind or a thought may come to your mind, and we want you to text those in so that we can try to address those questions and talk through and process this together. Dr. Zork,
Hey.
one of the most asked questions on Google is this question of theodicy. If God is so loving, if he is omnipotent, right, being all-powerful, then why does he allow things like racism and Holocaust and slavery and all these things to happen? Why? If God is so powerful, why doesn't he just stop it? I don't want to put you on the spot. This is a tough one.
Yeah, I don't know. I do know, actually. But first of all, there's a public forum here, so let me clear up something. I never quite finished my doctorate. So to all of you still struggling in school, I'm with you. So it's just Susan Zork. And pretty soon, sometimes I call myself Auntie Zork. Yeah, anybody ever taken a class from me? It's just to kind of keep it low and cool. Thank you, Danielle, for asking me to come, first of all. This question of theodicy, this trying to figure out and defend a good God in a horrible world, is probably the oldest and most gut-wrenching question that human beings have ever asked, at least this side of paradise. So, first of all, thanks for asking. Because there are many theories out there, hundreds of books, perhaps thousands, millions of words, likely, about trying to figure this thing out. Why would it be? It seems incongruent that we could live in such a painful world with the conviction that there is some kind of great, wise, loving, all-loving power out there. And so as I begin, and I've thought a lot about this. I've been around the block a few times. I've experienced a lot of heartache myself. In thinking about coming here today, I have, kind of fresh heartache, news on my heart, which I try not to talk about so I don't cry in front of everybody, but okay, I'll talk about it. I grew up in a family of 7 kids. I was the best, but the rest were pretty good. And folks loved them all. And, you kind of get into subsets and whatever. And I was in the middle subset with an older brother and an older sister, all 1 year apart. I lost that older sister to cancer a little over 2 years ago. About a week and a half ago, I found out that older brother, 1 year older than me, has been diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. And I said to God, no, not him. He's like my counter soul. We grew up, 1 year apart, foolish, funny, stupid people together. And it's just like I thought, wow, why to ask me to come and talk about this and then have me have to face it in real time. And we all face it. But I just bothered to tell you that because nobody is immune. And you probably knew that, but let's set that straight. So there's this problem out there, and I would say that it is the oldest, most heart-wrenching, difficult question that thoughtful people have had from time beginning. And it is worthy of our thinking. For those of you who are interested in truly studying the idea of theodicy, there's one book that I thought I wanted to just get out on the table here as we start. Richard Rice wrote a little book, pretty accessible for such a kind of a heavy topic as theodicy, and not very big either, called Suffering and the Search for Meaning. And in that book, he describes, probably, certainly from a God-believing standpoint, but a variety of ways of understanding who that God would be. He describes, I think, 6 or 7 theodicy schematics, ways of understanding it. The great controversy, certainly, just the power of good and the power of evil fighting each other. He has one that he calls soul making. You might imagine what that might be. I don't like that idea, that it makes me a better person to go through heartache.
Yeah, we hear that often.
It does, I guess. Everything hard that I've ever faced has made me more empathetic, maybe, more forgiving, cut people more slack, because I've been there too, maybe just more loving. But I know it doesn't always go that way. Sometimes hard things really take a turn in our outlook. And so, but soul-making idea, great controversy idea. There's even one that he describes about a finite God who totally is good, but has limitations. So anyway, if you're interested in looking at, I think that's an accessible book, first of all. For me, and this is definitely something that comes through in a number of the theodicies that Rice talks about, and it's definitely something that comes up in my life, is the concept of, you can fill in the blank for me, free will. Human free will. The privilege and responsibility of being able to make choices. And with those choices, in a fallen world, in an imperfect world, sometimes either you make choices that make life difficult for you, or you run into the choices that others have made that make life difficult for you. So then you have to decide, by the way, this is such an easy topic, so that when I get done, I'm going to explain quantum physics and then also human attractions and the whole thing of human love. I'll get to it all real quick. You know I love you, or I wouldn't have said yes to this.
I know.
Okay. So the first thing that we have to decide is what kind of value we put on our free choice. That we can make decisions, and those decisions will have consequences for the good and for the bad. And seriously, I'm telling you that that I think is one of the essential questions that you have to ask.
So Dr.
How
Zork,
important is it that you have free will?
if I'm hearing you clearly, you're saying that you believe that one of the reasons why things happen the way they are is as a result of our free will.
Yes. That we have the option to make choices, and they're not always good. And also, within the context of free will is we have to admit that we do not live in a perfect world regardless.
So it's not that God is causing these things to happen. It's that he gave us free will, and with giving us free will comes these type of consequences.
Yeah, I have a hard time with God, the concept of God choosing for bad things to happen in my life. I do. Although I have to admit that those bad things sometimes are allowed by him, because I know well that he could prevent it if it was in him to do so. So it's gray.
Yeah.
It's gray.
Yeah. Well, you lead us to a really good point. You're saying you know that he could prevent it. So there's a lot of biblical examples of God intervening in the gray, right? We have the story of the children of Israel under Pharaoh's, power, and he intervenes and he uses Moses and he lets his people, he tells Pharaoh, let my people go, and that whole story.
Yeah.
We have other examples of, him being with them, cloud of fire at night, a pillar of fire by night, a cloud by day, and he's just intervening and doing his God thing. So you see those experiences in the Old Testament and New Testament, bringing people back from the dead and all these things, and you're like, well, God, you said you would do greater in this time. We had the Holocaust, we've had slavery. Why didn't he intervene then if he has that power?
Okay, first of all, I do believe what is referenced in the end of the Gospel of Mark, that there will come a time when we will do what he is doing in greater things. I don't think we're there yet.
Okay.
I'm not sure what that will usher in, but I just want to get to that point.
Sure.
And it is scary and it's awesome to look at what Jesus did, and he says, there will come a time when you'll do this stuff and more. I don't know if you've ever been tempted or felt like you were called to go into some hospital and walk down the halls and just step into a room and say, you're healed. Get up out of bed. I don't know if that's happened to you yet. It hasn't, but I worry about it might happen. That God might call me to do something so ridiculous and so otherworldly and supernatural on his behalf. Am I silly to worry about that? Any person that dedicates their life every morning to God and says, show me what you want me to do, that's a valid worry to me. And a time is coming. So I think we're not there yet, but a time is coming. With regards to all that God has done in the past, I think we have a perception problem.
A perception, okay. Talk to us.
You look at the Exodus, for instance, where God came and people under, generations of slavery and difficulty, and God says, I'm going to get these people, I'm going to save them out of it, and I'm going to take them out of that and set them on a path to freedom and great work for me. And what we know is, from the rest of the story, is a lot of people didn't think it was such a great thing. There are times in the story of those freed people, those people that experienced the Exodus, that complained bitterly and said, guess what? We'd rather go back to Egypt. That's a perception problem. Yeah. That we think that it was all hunky-dory and ice cream cones and cupcakes after he took them out of Exodus. So one of the issues here is to look at life more honestly, and to say that God does do things for us, we don't always perceive them as they have come.
That's good. That's good.
We don't. And then there's like the Holocaust, which is like completely unexplainable, completely horrendous. And out of that are the most God-inspiring attitudes of devotion and love that you could ever imagine. You know, the famous quip that was written supposedly on the wall of a prison cell, that I believe in the sun even if it's not shining. That's a man stuck in a cell hated and spurned and taken away from everything that he loved and knew about life. I believe in the sun. I saw it one time, and I believe it's still there, even though it's no shining. I believe in love, even though I'm not feeling it. And he ends it, I believe in God, even when he's silent. And some of the most powerful mantras for living in the world have come out of circumstances where there was no freedom at all. What's that? That speaks to a perception issue on the part of the human race. And maybe we need to be open to rethink our perceptions.
That's real good, Dr. Zork. We're getting a lot of questions in, and I do want to address... I want to address one of them. Someone just told me my mask is upside down. Thank you so much. It always is. It's like a problem I have.
That's part of the gray. Is
Part of the gray.
Yeah. You got to get it straight.
But one question of clarity, I'm going to get it straight in a second, I promise. One question of clarity, as you talked about what your perception of why evil, how, what the cause of it is, and you talked about free will. And someone asked a question about, diseases and, how is that a result of someone's, decision, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so can you just talk about that for a moment? Because
Okay.
someone's wrestling with that.
Yeah, and sometimes disease is a somewhat of a consequence of choices that we make, but clearly it is not always. Clearly it just comes, I once knew a woman who contracted cancer and died of it. And her son said to me, I can never remember my mother even raising her voice. She was like such a godly woman that she just never even got upset or raised her voice. And I thought, man, I should be dying of so many things. To not be the perfect person that I am. So there is this question. Well, part of it is this. And there's two sides to so many coins, and this one as well. The Bible says, Jesus says in the ending of his Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 6, he says, look, the rain falls on everybody. There's a certain amount of rain that falls on everybody, and there's a certain amount of sun that shines on everybody. Here's the situation. We live in an imperfect world, and there's a lot of stuff coming at us from that, the good and the bad. And we have to deal with it. We do have to deal with it. And it's just part of, I hate to say this, but it's just part of, this is what it is. Yeah. This is what life is. And though we are called to fight for justice, though we are called to love the unlovable, we are called to fight for those that can't fight for themselves, all this stuff, the world is what it is, and it's a mixed up mess of the most wonderful that you could ever ask for and the most disgusting and sad and vile. And that's the world we live in. So what I like about God, what I like about Jesus is how they're honest about this kind of thing. See, they didn't, it's perception again.
Yes, yeah.
We set up something that we think ought to be the way, but they never said it. Well, one of my favorite stories about this is in Daniel 10, and Daniel's all, bent on getting an answer, clarity, and understanding on something. He even goes on a partial fast, and he prays and he prays and he hears nothing. In this story, the answer does eventually come to him. 3 weeks later, an angel shows up and says, hey, sorry, man. I heard you the first time that you asked, but I have been detained. Angels, heaven being detained. He says, the prince of Persia detained me. Well, that's code word for evil. Just look it up. And there's a whole slew of battles and a whole slew of things, and there is a devil working against us. I'm sorry, I know you've heard it before, but I totally believe it. And it's manifestly true in the world around us. And so God's fighting these battles, and maybe that battle is not one that he can fight because he's out fighting a bigger one, a more permanent one, another battle The ending is that he finally does show up, and sometimes we could talk so much about the need for just faith, trust, believing that it will work out in the end. But it's not as though God isn't moving. Related to that, Jesus had the same idea. I can't say favorite because there's so many, but I love what Jesus says at the end of John 16. When he's talking about that he's leaving, but he's going to come back, this whole promise of something more to come. And he says, look, I'm telling you this because, you know what it says? Because in this world you will have trouble.
Yeah.
He's very honest. You got to give him that.
Yeah.
And then he goes on to say, but I'm telling you this because you're going to have trouble, but you can still take your heart and have peace. And I love that, take your heart. Because that's just because you're going to have trouble, don't stop loving, don't stop believing. Take your heart along with you because I've got a bigger plan. And that's where the real hope comes in. Yeah, disease and stuff is the world we live in.
And he never promised that everything
And he
would
never
go right.
promised it wouldn't be that way. Mm-hmm. We're living in a fallen world. We're not living in a perfect world. And anyone who would tell you otherwise they're delusional. But still, there's a plan. Yeah. And still there's a hope, not only for the future, but he says, I'm telling you stuff so you can take your heart right now. You can live with your heart right now and have some kind of peace even while you deal with it. I don't know if that's the answer, but that's my hope. That's my hope. By the way, I know you've got questions for me. Here's something that I learned a long time ago. I think from Skip McCarty, and I loved it. He says, at the end of the day, and I still ask myself this series of questions. Do you want a God or don't you? Do I want a God or don't I? I do. I do. I want a God. I want someone smarter, more loving, certainly more wise, more endearing, and more enduring, something that's going to last than me. And maybe the older we get, the more heartache we face, the more we think, boy, I want that. Boy, I want that. Okay, do you want a God? And I always say, yep, I do. This is my conversation with myself. Well, what kind of a God do you want? I think, well, I don't want an ogre. I don't want some mean God. I want a good God. I want a God that's got a plan. I want a God that will help me out. I want a God to be there for me. Okay. So I've answered the question of whether I want God or not and what kind of God I want. And then I ask myself, do I want a God? Do I need a God? What kind of a God do I hope against hope is true? And I ask myself those questions a lot. Do I want a God? What kind of a God do I want? What kind of a God do I need? And what kind of a God do I hope against hope is really there? And I answer those questions. I would invite you to ask yourself those questions. What do you want? What do you need? What do you hope is true? And then I go out and look for him. Can I find that God that I want, that I need, that I hope against hope is true? And as corny maybe as this sounds, I've looked a lot. And I found that God. I like Jesus. I like him. And frankly, I'm not drawn to him for the cone of protection that he puts around me. I'm drawn to Jesus because of Jesus. Yeah. I just like him. That's the God I want. That's the God I've found. I would invite you to ask yourself those questions and then go see if you can find it. Go see if you can find it.
That's really good, Dr. Zork. I do want to say this as we're getting ready to wrap up, is that we are not trying to tell you what to think.
No.
We're here to help you process what you think. And as you're processing, you will begin to see God in a healthier perspective. You know, Dr. Zork, you mentioned that we all have our gray. You have your gray. I have my gray. I've had gray all my life that I can remember. And, as we close out, I'll tell you, my gray, I've been open about this, has been my immigration situation. That I came to this country legally, but I stayed unlegally. I've been an illegal immigrant, as they would call us, undocumented, for a very long time. And I wasn't aware of that until it was time to go to college. And, when you're undocumented, that means you can't work legally, you can't drive, you can't get a license, you can't get a job. There's a whole lot of can'ts, there's a whole list. Yeah. And so I used to say to myself, God, why would you bring me here if I can't do a whole lot of things? Like, why would you do this to me? I never asked to come to America. I didn't like America. It was cold, it was freezing. I lived in New York. I came from a very hot country. It was summer all year round.
Yeah.
Like, why? I never asked for this. Why would you do this to me? But I'll tell you something, that even in that gray, I saw God. I experienced him. And even though he didn't answer my prayer and my longing the way I wanted him to, he still answered my prayers anyway. Yeah. And he sustained me. And I'm telling you, it's just like, I would not take back that experience for the world. Because I was able to experience God and the power of God, not in the way that I wanted to, but in the way that he allowed me to. And Dr. Zork, all the things that I couldn't do because of my immigration situation, I still did. I still went to college.
Yep.
I still graduated debt-free. I still got my master's. I mean, anything that the government said I couldn't do, I was still able to do, not because of me, but because of God.
Yeah.
And I'm saying that to say that even in the gray, that God can make himself known.
Yeah.
And he can still do, even with the limits that you have in your situation.
Yeah.
So as you process, how can I see God in the gray? How can I love God in the gray? How can I understand God in the gray? We hope that this conversation was a starter to greater conversations to come, and that you and God will build something beautiful, and that your story, your experience can be a blessing to others. As the show comes and gives us our closing remarks, I want to remind you that we are not here to tell you what to think. We're here to guide you and help you process what you think. Have a blessed week.